Hello, and welcome back to the Let Me Add to That podcast. My name is Elizabeth Graswich, Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We are the largest regional education agency in the United States. We serve 80 school districts and nearly 2 million children. We are excited to use this platform to take a deep dive into the conversations surrounding our students and schools in LA County.
Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Pahikat tameraat ni.
Happy Native American Heritage Month. This month, we strive to highlight and celebrate the heritage, culture, and traditions of Native Americans. Joining us today is the Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Debra Duardo. Hi, Dr. Duardo.
Hi, good morning.
Alongside Dr. Duardo, we have Pamela Villaseñor, the Executive Director of Pukúu, who is a proud parent of one of our Los Angeles County students. She's the singer of the traditional Native American song we just heard that celebrates fall and the coming of winter. Stay tuned for more of that wonderful music a bit later. Welcome, Pamela.
Hamianat.
So nice to have you both here today. And, Pamela, I want to start with you and the organization that you work with. Pukúu is a truly incredible organization. Can you tell us a little bit about its history and mission and how it serves Native Americans in Los Angeles County?
Pukúu Cultural Community Services was founded by my tribal community, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. We are the people of the northern half of Los Angeles County. And what happened was my people, as part of the civil rights movement, did community organizing, and in 1971 founded our 501c3 that today is known as Pukúu Cultural Community Services to really be the social service agency to uplift and empower not only our tribal community, but Native Americans who call our homelands their home.
That's beautiful. And Dr. Duardo, it's such an important thing for schools to ensure that we are including Native American history and culture in the classroom. How do we do that?
It's absolutely important. And LA County is the largest county in the nation with Native American people. So we need to get it right. It's critical that we understand the population that we're serving and that we are celebrating the wonderful achievements of Native Americans.
And, Pamela, one of the things that I was excited about you coming and joining us is you're also a parent and a parent of a Native American student. And so, what are the unique challenges and opportunities you've experienced as a mom in this context?
Well, I would say first that I am a product of LA schools, born and raised in my own homelands. And it was very different, I think, for my mother to navigate as a Native American parent with Native American students back in the 80s and 90s without the same level of resources and visibility for our population. And so after I exited the K-12 system and went to college, I eventually found myself back with my own tribal government. Mm-hmm. And I created the first tribal education department in the county of Los Angeles. Cool. And I bring this up because my daughter now gets the fruits of my labor. We have this education and cultural learning department of my tribe, which has this vast array of different workshops and academic supports and cultural teachings available for K-12 students and even those in earlier education and college. And so as a parent, it makes it much easier for me to navigate how to support my elementary age child in a system that wasn't built for Native Americans. And so I'm grateful for all of those tribal departments and Native American serving organizations, and even here on this podcast, giving visibility to our students. And if this reaches just one Native parent or teacher who has more questions, then it makes everything worth it.
And we're just so grateful to have you here and grateful to your organization for uplifting and educating and making people aware. Unfortunately, there isn't enough awareness, and even capturing the data is a challenge to make sure that we know exactly where our Native American students are, where they're attending school, what are the circumstances of their families. So we appreciate you being here.
And you just shared how it's changed from, when you were growing up in the county and for your daughter now. And, how is the county collaborating with Native organizations to create a more supportive and inclusive learning environment?
Prior to the pandemic, this is before I had a child, I approached the county and a very large city for permission to gather acorns in my own homelands. And what I discovered is that neither governments had a permitting process for which the local land-based tribes could legally permit on or legally gather on our own homelands. So that means any gathering that I would do myself or take families and children, we're running the risk of citations or being arrested just for the practice of our own food sovereignty. But if you look at what that really means, that means in the centuries that have passed, governments have not bothered to ask, how are the local land-based tribes surviving? And that led us down a path to do more community organizing. And recently, the County of Los Angeles has been engaging with the local land-based tribes on a multi-phase tribal consultation and what that means and how they can do better. So in that way, the county is making strides, and they are trying to do more equitable processes with Native American organizations such as mine that has county contracts to do things like put a roof over someone's head or invest in Indigenous youth to make the next generation of social justice leaders.
You just piqued my interest when you talked about food. And so I'm just curious about the acorn harvesting and that tradition and how you've passed that along even to your daughter.
I have a personal passion in traditional ecological knowledge, which is a subset of Indigenous knowledges, which is just the way in which Indigenous peoples organize information in the universe. But in this way, it's our connection to the land, our connection to water and air, and everything. And so since my daughter's been young, I take her out gathering with me. She goes out and gathers acorns. We go out and gather yucca. And she has known since she was very young that everyone has a role. And that's part of being part of a village-based people, is that everyone's important and everyone has ability to do something. And as she grows, her responsibility grows as well. So this is acorn season, and we're very happy to do processing. And of course, she's a Gen Alpha, so she has me record her doing acorn bread baking.
I love it.
For this non-existent YouTube channel that she wants. That's not going to happen. But then I share it with other Indigenous youth and on my channels so that she has a voice that's uplifted and can show that she's engaging in food sovereignty and what it means to connect to our ancestors as a current generation.
That's so beautiful and so incredibly empowering for her to know that history and to share and understand her responsibility in relation to those around her and being a part of that. And it's absolutely beautiful and so important that our students have that.
We were talking a little bit before we got started about Pukúu and the work you do with schools. And so how can we, share a little bit more about that in terms of local partners and how they can help Native students and families succeed on their educational journey?
It's really a partnership. And I believe that it comes down to children, families, and school personnel, and of course, community. So children need to be taught how to advocate. Parents need to have the accessibility to schools to advocate. And then community has to uplift and prop up the needs of our families and our children. I'll give you an example. My daughter's in third grade. And for the past couple years, because she started with pandemic virtual schooling, so she's only been on campus for a couple years, they sent home these packets. And there's always one page that the teacher says, "Tell me about your student." And I always mention that we are citizens of a California tribal nation, and she's sensitive to misinformation because she's often the only Native student in the classroom. And so anytime someone makes a joke or says something that's offhanded, and even though they're children, they don't really mean to hurt one another, it becomes hurtful to her. And it becomes even more difficult to be a representative of our tribal nation when she is the lone person. And so I think in that way, teachers can do that simple thing of uplifting a Native student. As you know, the second Monday in October is Indigenous Peoples Day. And she, of course, wore one of the t-shirts from our tribe. And she was very excited to tell me that her teacher said, "I like your t-shirt." Mm-hmm. And that meant the world to my daughter, that on Indigenous People Day, somebody acknowledged her t-shirt and that she was tribal. So those little things that teachers can do, I think, transforms a classroom, but also that parents can advocate for historically accurate and a culturally competent curriculum, which unfortunately has been absent since I've been in K through 12. And that's really the path forward with these new ethnic studies requirements, is how are school districts partnering with the local land-based tribes, with Native American serving organizations to ensure that it's our narratives from our lens and our frameworks, not just people hired from outside of our communities to build these fantastic stories and celebrations.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned ethnic studies, because one of the things that we do here at LACOE is we do provide training to our districts on how to incorporate Native American studies into the classroom. And we always tell our schools and districts that you need to go far beyond what we're teaching you here, far beyond what the law requires, but really threading in Native American history throughout all of the grade levels and subject areas, and working with the Native American community to lead that work. So I'm glad that you mentioned ethnic studies, and it is progress. We're not anywhere near where we should be, but I'm glad to say that there's some progress around making ethnic studies a graduation requirement and giving our students the opportunity to learn about different cultures and especially their own. That's critical. You talked about your daughter wanting to feel like, this sense of belonging, that she's the only one in the classroom, and the little things that teachers can do to make sure that students are acknowledged, that they're uplifted, that they notice and pay attention to the types of things that are important to each one of our students. So I'm glad to hear that someone acknowledged her on a very special day.
And it's great that you're reaching out to school districts and providing that support, because I know that we are such a small insular community. It can be difficult to start a relationship, but one of the values that is honored by so many tribal communities is relationality. Mm-hmm. Just get to know us, start a conversation, then that relationship can build and we can have a partnership and work together on how to further support Native American students and families.
Yeah, and when you said get to know us, I think it's interesting, because if we're not collecting the data, and when I first met you, and today's the first day I had the opportunity to meet you, I look at you and you look like a Latina to me. I would have made an assumption that you're Latina, and I'm sure you get a lot of that in living in Los Angeles. And it's so important that we understand how different, there's different cultures. Yes, there's indigenous people that are Mexican, that come from Mexico, but so important that we learn more about Native Americans. And I'm so glad that you're here today.
And that data is so crucially important. I'm so happy to talk about data because it really is the baseline for a lot of resources coming into Indian country, into tribes and Native American communities. And so when we are miscounted and underrepresented, it impacts tribal set-asides and programs for tribes. That's part of tribal sovereignty. It's this unique relationship with the federal government that makes a government-to-government relationship. So I think data is important, and you're right. When people look at me, they don't necessarily know that I am Native American, because Americans have no idea what a Native American looks like. Mm-hmm. Because Hollywood has controlled our representation and what we look like, what we sound like, where we live. And yet we are thriving modern people who have, our own sense of belonging and the way in which we operate in society. And just so happens to be, like you said, the largest Native population of any county in the country is right here in LA.
You talked earlier about the challenge of data collection. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
We have to remember that school districts were not made for Native Americans. In fact, just recently, it was September 30th, which is Orange Shirt Day, in which we remember all of the Native American children who were stolen and taken from their tribal communities and put into federal Indian boarding schools. And what we know is there is a long legacy of intergenerational trauma that occurred to those young children taken from their families and happened for over a century, being operated by these government-sponsored Indian boarding schools. And what that means at the end of the day is that there potentially is this distrusting relationship between tribes and federal government and tribes and educational systems, especially when these educational systems were not invested in Native narratives, in providing pathways into careers that we need. But what we are seeing now is that we have Native attorneys who went to the Supreme Court and fought on behalf of the Indian Child Welfare Act, by the way, last year, that was upheld. And these are all ways in which I think parents are trying to navigate in this century of how do we heal? How do we move forward with districts and work in partnerships? Are districts being responsive and teachers? And I think that all starts with the visibility, representation, and people wanting to have a relationship.
I love that word, relationship. And what would you advise to our school districts, our schools, of how can they build those relationships? What should they do?
They should first reach out to the local land-based tribes for which they operate upon. Also reaching out perhaps to the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission, reaching out to Native American-based service organizations, and have that first conversation of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'd like to start listening. Mm-hmm. And then go from there. And I'm sure those organizations and tribes will put the school districts in communication with the appropriate partners.
That's so important. I think it's exactly what you said. First, having the willingness and the interest in learning more and going to the people themselves to learn how we can best support them. So I totally agree. I think it's always about that, going to the people that we're trying to serve and not assuming that we know what's best for them, but going to the people themselves and asking them what they need and what they want and how we can partner to get there.
Absolutely. You know, this question is for both of you. So when we talk about how things have changed, one of the things that we've started to see and hear lately is land acknowledgements. And so can you explain a little bit about the significance of land acknowledgement and, you know, how, Dr. Duardo, we use those in our schools and here at LACOE?
Yeah, we use them here in all of our LACOE meetings, at our board meetings, and all of our schools. And I think one is just so important that we recognize the historical land ownership of Indigenous peoples, that we're acknowledging their displacement and the ongoing struggles and, you know, our role in that. So I think it's really important. I think in terms of respect and recognition, we're showing the Native American community that we care about their cultures and their contributions, and that we want to foster a sense of inclusivity and a sense of belonging, and that we're, you know, trying to, in some ways, it's reconciliation and acknowledging, you know, the wrongs that have been done. And, you know, and I think that's a big step towards reconciliation, is building those positive relationships and letting them know. And cultural sensitivity, demonstrating cultural sensitivity and respect for diverse peoples. And, you know, just acknowledging this was their land. We are here, you know, and to honor that, I think, is absolutely critical. And so I love it when I hear, because we have statements that are written out to make sure that there is that acknowledgement. But I love it when people take it and just put it in their own words. And it's really coming from the heart. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's important for Native Americans to hear that and to realize that we are acknowledging that, you know, we displaced many people and there were many harms done. And I think just acknowledging that is very important.
It's meaningful to see so many organizations adopt land acknowledgements. And while it has become commonplace, there are a number of tribes and Native American leaders across the country saying, now you have a land acknowledgement. How do we make sure that is not a tokenized statement? Mm-hmm. And what does that mean to move forward with land acknowledgements. But land acknowledgements require context if we're going to tell true stories. And often that is mired in generational trauma, which makes it a difficult and awkward conversation to have with people when they're just getting introduced to one another. So I'm going to share a little story with you. Did you know LA had Indian reservations? And my family had one of them. You see, before the 1770s, my tribe, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, lived throughout villages in northern LA County, totaling more than 1.5 million acres. That's 1.5 million acres of orange groves, of water sources, of sacred sites for our ceremonies. But by the time Mexican colonization came to fruition here in California, that land base significantly shrank. Fortunately, there was a Mexican governor who gave Mexican village land grants to our tribal leaders for some villages here in LA, and it totaled 18,000 acres. But by 1900, under U.S. colonization, our land base shrank to zero. Every single acre of 1.5 million acres was taken. So fast forward to today in 2024, land acknowledgements are great, but you know what's better? Land. And so the great thing is this past year, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians celebrated with a land return of more than 500 acres from a private resident. A private resident learned about our tribe, felt moved, and donated this land return of 500 acres to us. That's 500 acres that we get to dream upon. What does that mean to finally have land stewardship for my tribal community? What does that master planning process look like? How are we going to have that land for future generations? And that all goes back to land acknowledgements, is having meaningful partnership with people who live upon the land. And what could that partnership look like?
I'm so glad you said that, because I don't know that I've thought about land acknowledgements in that deeper context, and that's how we need to be thinking about them. And that kind of brings me back to, schools and, ensuring that we are teaching about these things in our schools. And also, when we talk about like a Native American Heritage Month, making sure that we're not doing it just 1 month. So like, what can schools do to make sure that we're talking about this year round?
I always say every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. Mm-hmm. And, indigeneity is this global concept. There are millions upon millions of Indigenous peoples around the world. And when it comes to Native American Heritage Month, we're talking about the people whose homelands originate here. Since time immemorial, before any of these other governments that we see and are part of today. So part of our representation is understanding that we have different worldviews. For my family, for so many tribal families and Native families, we think about culture as medicine. You're really taking this Native American medicine wheel framework and applying that to our lives. What does mental health look like? What does physical health, spiritual health, and communal health? And we know all those things are important to people. So working in partnership with our schools and with our families and understanding that culture is medicine as a baseline is really a great way to get to know us.
I totally agree that, when we're talking about Native American heritage, that it's not something that we do once a month. It's not something that we just check off and say, okay, we did it. We did our part. It goes way beyond that. And I think a big part of it is also making sure that we are sharing more about the history, the traditions, the culture. We need to make sure that we have Native American authors. We need to make sure that we are culturally proficient in our education and in our classrooms so that students are getting accurate information and lessons. And that hasn't happened. And, I think that's been very clear that the teachings have not been accurate. And so I think that teaching accurate, culturally relevant information where students can see themselves in the country, see themselves and their role, and to be empowered like your daughter to know how incredibly remarkable, they are. They are Native people, so I think doing that, and some of the things that we talked about, like, the land acknowledgements, we want to make sure that doesn't seem like just a token. So in addition to the land acknowledgements, which is exposing people and educating, that we're doing all of these other things. The ethnic studies is a big part of that. I know that one of the things that we did recently is we hosted the Feather Alert Roundtable here at LACOE. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a notification system similar to what we see when an amber alert or a silver alert takes place when someone is missing. And it's specifically for missing Native Americans, particularly women and girls. And I think, unfortunately, there's been a culture somehow of it not seeming as meaningful when a Native American girl or woman goes missing. Like, there isn't that immediate action and desire for everybody to start looking and doing everything that they can to identify what went wrong. So I think doing those types of things are important. We know that there's a disproportionality in terms of rates of violence and disappearances of Native American girls and women, and it's something that I felt good about being a part of and making sure that we can host that here. So there's a lot more to do, but I think that, we are taking actions and there's a lot more to do.
And I'm grateful that you all were able to host that event, which of course was brought into life by Assembly Member James Ramos, who of course is a citizen of a California tribal nation. And I think about representation when I think of him and I think of other people. Talking about Native American Heritage Month is every month. I think about ways in which other people, and including my family, show up. And that's like today, wearing wearable art, right? Jewelry or clothing that's important. And just a couple weeks ago, I ordered a dress from a Native designer for my daughter. And of course, she was excited to open it up. And it's a modern version of what are ribbon skirts, which is a cultural type of skirt that we wear. And she looked in the bag and saw a little picture of this Native designer. And my daughter says, "She slays." And I laughed and I said, "Yes, she does slay." And my daughter proceeded to take that little poster and put it in her room on her wall. And just think about how powerful that is, that my daughter gets to wake up in the morning and see a Native woman looking back at her who's a now somewhat mainstream Native designer making modern clothes for our community. And it's that type of way in which we can honor Native American Heritage Month every month throughout the year.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it back to your daughter, because you showed us a picture of your daughter before we got started, and her image has been kind of floating through my mind as we've had this conversation. And one of the things we wanted to ask you about is, what are the traditions that you prioritize at home? As a mother, what do you teach her and share with her?
It's funny. I can't say that I have an action plan as to how I'm parenting my child. I don't know if any parents do, but to those that do, kudos to them. Instead, so much of her upbringing was around the pandemic. So I had to find ways to take her out. And that's really how we got into traditional ecological knowledge with her. Her coming out with me and gathering in spaces where, of course, we weren't around other people, teaching her what that means to process acorns, but also that it's not formulaic. So when we're processing acorns, it's not just the journey or the ends. It's all of that, because it creates this atmosphere in which I can give her teachings as a young girl and what it's going to mean to move to the next stage of her life, or what our responsibility is to the earth, to our tribe, to people who call our homelands their home. And it's finding ways to talk about these very big metaphysical concepts to a very little child. And so that is this ever-ending journey that I have with her that it's not just an educational journey for academics, but it's an educational journey on how do I support this little person's character formation and growth in cultural identity.
And, you spoke to this a little bit more, but I want to bring it back. So for her and for children that from the Native American tribes, when they see their cultural heritage represented at school, how does that make them feel?
Oh, she loves when people know about our tribe, and she attends a school district within our tribal homelands. And I always gift her teacher one of the workbooks from my tribe. So they get to see the stories and the language and the numbers. And of course, my daughter can share more information with them. And she will brag that, one of her uncles is the head singer. And she'll talk about that she dances and he sings. And it's just a wonderful way in which children can uplift and tell a story. And we don't always think about narrative sovereignty as it applies to little children. But if you ever just sit back and listen to kids talk to one another, they are having complete control over their conversations. And I think as parents, it's just our obligation to give them those teachings and the bullet points, and they find ways in which to apply that in their own life.
We've come some distance, but we certainly have a lot longer distance to go. And so when you look towards the future, what would be your dream in terms of seeing schools continue to provide equitable and culturally responsive education for Native American students?
For school districts, it's important to reach out to the land-based tribes, to Native serving organizations. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Indigenous Education Now Coalition, for which Pukúu Cultural Community Services is a founding member. And of course, we have our own slate and agenda of things that we are working towards, from policies to internal practices with districts. That, of course, is important to building out this future. But I also think it's important to have dreams and Indigenous futurism and what that means. For example, I have a goddaughter through ceremony, and years ago I took her to a UCLA game, and she was middle school, maybe at the time, young high school, and someone asked her, if your tribe gets recognized and you suddenly have the money, do you want a football stadium like this? And without skipping a beat, she looked at him and said, why? We could just build our own college. And that was cool. That was the moment, right? She was not interested in what existed. She was dreaming, no matter how improbable it would seem. That is the type of futures that tribes and Native Americans want, for those young ones to dream bigger than us. I always say I want them to take over our tribal government one day and do better and be better than us. There's no telling what these young generations can do. We just need to build that foundation for them to dream and move forward.
I totally agree. I always say, let the adults get out of the way and our youth will come up with solutions if we honor them, if we teach them properly, and if we guide them. I agree that community partnerships are critical and that we need to connect with Native American communities to make sure that we are developing culturally relevant programs and that we are getting their input. As I said earlier, we're not assuming that we know what's best. Along with that is student voice, and really making sure that students have the opportunity not only to dream, but to express those dreams and to lead and to empower them so that they feel like they have those opportunities to be seen. And then again, the culturally relevant curriculum and incorporating that, not just in, history, but incorporating it into the different core content areas and throughout the instructional day, and making sure that people are aware. I didn't know that much about Native American history, and I always thought, oh, that's because I was a high school dropout and I didn't really go to high school. And then only later, when I ended up getting a doctorate in education, I realized, well, it really doesn't exist, or what is there is just very inaccurate. So I think we need to continue to do all of those things and more, but it really starts with listening to the people themselves and partnering with them and learning from them and honoring them so that we can do better.
Well, I cannot thank you both enough. I mean, what a wonderful conversation. I personally have learned so much. So thank you, Pamela and Dr. Duardo, for being here with us today. It's so important that we celebrate and uplift Native American heritage beyond just the month of November. We hope that this conversation will inspire you to do just that. And for resources and more information about Native American Heritage Month, please visit LACOE.edu. Thank you. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Of course. Can I add more?
You can.
Well, since Native American Heritage Month is in November, it's a season of fall. Of course, for tribes, Indigenous knowledges involve everything and often our relationality to the universe. And so I thought I would share a song.
That is so beautiful.
I love it.
Okay.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're doing that.
It is a fall song, and it's talking about gathering the acorns and preparing for winter. In this way, we're able to teach our children our songs, our language, talk about the meaning of gathering in community in preparation for winter. So I am going to use a clapper stick, which is one of our native instruments. And I will give a disclaimer. My brother is the head singer, not me. So please don't have high expectations. But we do teach our children that everyone needs to sing. Everyone needs to know how to do a blessing, how to introduce themselves and be part of our community, which means I, of course, am going to be in this brave space and sing for you and all of these listeners. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Pahikat tameraat niv. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Icham che twi chi chi ayev. Pahikat tameraat niv. And with that, I wish everyone a restorative fall as we prepare for winter, and know that I hope to gather with you soon.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Please follow the Los Angeles County Office of Education on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Los Angeles COE. That's Los Angeles COE. Or you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Los Angeles County Office of Education.